Clemson and Colorado have one thing in common. Two things. They both play college football, and they both start with the letter C. That is where these program similarities begin and end. Thank you. Come again. So Clemson has added a whopping 0 transfer portal players in the 2024 cycle. And Dabo Swinney has been adamant that he wants to remain old school, that he wants to cater directly to those fans, many of whom leave comments on my shows routinely, that the old way was the best way. The only way to really play true, honest to goodness, patriotic, real American way American football is without the transfer portal and not having all these mercenaries and free agency gone wild in college football. He's putting that to the test. And I think it's easy from the outset to look at Clemson and say, well, that's not going to work. Well, that's doomed to fail. That depends on how you define failure. Because Dabo Swinney last year and Clemson won 9 games, 8 in the regular season. Some of you don't care about bowl season. I'm not one of those individuals. Clemson was a 9-win team. I can assure you Kentucky was trying to win that game, and Clemson was able to get it done. And so Clemson this year has added 0 transfers, and they have had 13 players leave. Now, if you just look at those two numbers, you would think Clemson is going to be an utter disaster with their roster this year. That is simply not the case. Vegas doesn't think that's the case, as we'll discuss a little bit later on. But Clemson's roster is still one of the 15 to 20 best in all of college football. Would it be enhanced by opening the doors to transfer portal players? Yes, absolutely, particularly at the wide receiver position. But have they lost just swaths and swaths of players to the portal that were impact players last year? Is their roster completely depleted? The answer to that question is a definitive no. And I got the numbers to back it up. So, the last 3 cycles, 22, 23, and 24, Clemson's high school recruiting classes have ranked 10th, 11th, and 11th. That is not bad. Also, I would like to remind you that Clemson was an 8-4 team last year, and they were 0-2 in overtime games. 0-2. If they win one of those, does that feel different? What if they win both? Those are 50-50 coin toss games. They happen to lose both of them. So take that for whatever you'd like. Nebraska fans, I'm sure, have their own opinions on the matter. But Cade Klubnik is back at quarterback. I think he's tremendously talented. He's got his head coach, Dabo Swinney, back. He's got his offensive coordinator and Garrett Riley back. That's my favorite combination. It's why I can't write off Clemson. But the roster construction is another reason that I can't write them off. But when you've got coach, head coach, OC, and quarterback returning, that is a fairly, not entirely, but that is a fairly unique formula in today's world of college football, where players leave, they run out of eligibility, coaches leave, and whatnot. Klubnik was not great last year. Was not bad, for sure, but can improve. Pro Football Focus had him graded around 64. That seems a little low to me. But would I put him in the 80-90 range if I were giving him a PFF grade? No, I would not, based on what I saw from Cade Klubnik last year. And it's reasonable to think in his second full year of starting at quarterback, he's going to be a better player. He's got good coaching around him. Does he have great weapons around him? Well, we know he has a good running back in Phil Maffa. That guy, that's a football player right there. So I don't think Clemson's going to have any issues running the football. Well, Spencer, what about their offensive line? Do they have any talent in that? I'm so glad you asked. Clemson certainly has 1 or 2 spots along the offensive line that might be up for grabs, that are getting played out during spring football. Maybe they'll decide during fall camp. But you've got 4 or 5 guys that were either starters or rotation players last year that logged many hundreds of snaps for Clemson's offensive line last year who are back this season. That's the bulk of the big boys up front, who, again, are following a more traditional career trajectory. You come in as true freshmen, you sit for a year or 2, then you start to get your snaps, and then you start to get better. And now's the year where Clemson would like to see some of those guys put it all together. So that's where their roster is starting out. That is a strong foundation. good coaching, capable quarterback, great running back, and an expected, at least experienced offensive line that I'd expect to be good. So that's a good place to start. Now, the questions are on the perimeter because last year they returned Tyler Brown at wide receiver, who had over 500 yards receiving last year. They lost Bo Collins, though. He hit the transfer portal. And I think if you talk about Clemson's transfer portal strategy and say, well, who did they actually lose? What are the guys that are really making an impact? 13 outgoing players. I saw 2 that made a legitimate impact last year. Bo Collins, over 500 yards receiving, almost 40 receptions. That's a loss. And that's the sort of loss that, boy, it feels like Clemson should be able to just go out and get a transfer dish. But remember, they're not recruiting 0-star kids. They're bringing in a bevy of blue chip prospects. They have a 5-star wideout in the 2024 class. We'll see if he's ready to contribute as a true freshman come this fall. But if you lose a guy like Bo Collins, other programs would traditionally say, let's bring in a transfer. Let's bring in a guy who we know can produce at that sort of level and we have no drop-off. Clemson feels like they can just develop somebody to play in that sort of role. And we'll see how it works out. The other loss is Andrew Makuba. He transferred to Texas. Longhorns have had a great offseason. Great offseason in the transfer portal. And Andrew Makuba is one of the players why. He's not the only one. You bring in guys like Isaiah Bond from Alabama, Silas Bolden from Oregon State, amongst others. Makuba's a good football player. 4th leading tackler for Clemson a year ago. Okay, that's a loss. That's a loss. A 500-yard receiver and your 4th leading tackler at safety. Those are the biggest impact transfer departures from Clemson's transfer portal outgoing class this year. So don't get fooled into thinking, wow, 13 gone and none coming in. Well, only 2 of those guys made a real significant impact, and they made an impact, no doubt about it. But Clemson, I think, is going to be able to recover those particular losses, and Vegas agrees. So, betting lines, which we'll talk about more later in the show, has got Clemson's win total at 9.5. Now, does that mean they're a national title contender? Perhaps not in the eyes of the odds makers, because week 1, they have to play a neutral site game in Atlanta against Georgia, which is essentially a road game. They're almost a 2-touchdown underdog, 13.5. We'll learn a lot about Clemson in that particular game. We won't learn everything, though. We will not learn how many games Clemson is scheduled to win in that particular game, because you are going to be working some new guys into the rotation at various spots. You are going to have Cade Klubnik still trying to find his way to reach his full ceiling. I've got a hot take. He's not going to have the best game of his career against Kirby Smart and Georgia down in Atlanta. Just a thought. But it's not all bad news in the betting sense for Clemson here. I think this number's too large, personally. They're 8.5-point favorites at home against NC State and Dave Doran. I think that's too many. That's too many. But Vegas thinks they're deserving of that. That's a big number. Over a touchdown? Over a touchdown and the hook against NC State. I don't know if Clemson wins that game by more than 7 or 8 points. I might lean right now towards the Wolfpack, who I think have done a great job in this offseason to make themselves the best they can be for 2024. I think they're going to be an 8-10 win team. Now, Florida State, conversely, if you want an encapsulation of how Vegas feels about Clemson's roster and their ability to compete, at Florida State, who have gone bonkers in the portal. They've had a fantastic, busy offseason in the transfer portal. Florida State just a 3.5-point home favorite over Clemson. It's not a big number. It's not a big number. So, Clemson's transfer portal numbers don't look good. Their roster is still going to be one of the 15 to 20 best in all of college football.